sail in the wind, filling the sail and carrying it along. And I think that's how we should be as Christians. I kind of cheat sometimes when Brother Josh gives me a little insight into what he's going to preach on, so I think he's going to describe that a little better today probably than I can. I'd just like to share a quote with you that I read this morning as I was going over the scripture again from Warren Wiersbe. Baptism of the Spirit means that I belong to Christ's body. The filling of the Spirit means that my body belongs to Christ. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your word, for revealing yourself through us through your Holy Scripture. Forgive us if we don't consistently obey your words that are life-giving. Strengthen us, I pray, to continually give ourselves to your ways and to be controlled by you, by the Holy Spirit's power. Thank you for the blessing that you give us daily. We love you. We praise you. In Jesus Christ's holy name we pray. Amen.
Nail on the head about what it means to be Spirit-filled. Right on that. We'll get to that in just a minute. First, I'm just curious. How many of y'all grew up in this church? Okay. How many of you been to another Southern Baptist church? How many of you been to another denomination? Different denominations? Okay. If you've been at a different church, then you know that every church is unique in some way. It has its own little quirks. It has its own different kinds of culture. Every church is just a little bit different. And Tim Hawkins, a Christian comedian, you can Google his own. He does a really funny bit about all these different worship styles. It's a really funny bit that he does. But I've been in a bunch of different churches. And just along my own sort of experiences, there are like 3 different kinds of churches that you can go in. There is the first group, I call them the frozen chosen. The frozen chosen. Now they say, I love Jesus, but I'm far too pious to express it in any way that's visible. It looks like you walk by the sanctuary, it looks like somebody plays a cruel joke on them. They walk by, they shop with the freeze rain and set chemicals in their hands. They're standing there all frozen in place. That's the frozen chosen. That's the first group. The second group of people that I'll come across is what I call the I love Jesus, but I also know the frozen chosen is watching. Right? They'll be singing, and every now and then you'll see them slip their hand up a little, and then they'll, I know that people are looking at me. I want to express it, but I just can't because I know people are watching. So that's the second group of people that I love Jesus, but I know the frozen chosen are watching. And then you've got the third group of people, and I just call them the Jesus freak flag flyers. Right? They're just all in. It's like, woo, Jesus, just all the time, man. They're just waving the arms around.
Amen.
3 kinds of people there. You got the frozen chosen, you got the I love Jesus, but I know the frozen chosen are watching, and the Jesus freak flag flyers. Which group are we? So raise your hand if you know which group we are. That's what I'm talking. Some of y'all would raise your hand if Jesus walked through going, who wants free candy? Right? Elise is trying to give a $20 bill away a minute ago. Nobody's raising their hand. We are the frozen chosen. That's who we are. Does that make us wrong? No. Does that make the other ones wrong? No. Does that make us right? No, that doesn't make us right. Does that make the other ones right? No, not necessarily. It doesn't make anybody else right either. You see, we equate worship to a particular style, how we behave. We equate worship to a particular external expression of that. But that's not what worship is. True worship is an internal condition of the heart that it expresses itself outwardly. And style is no indicator of rightness or wrongness. When it comes to the outward expression of worship, the Bible gives some latitude there. And when we get to heaven, we're all going to see that. When we get to heaven, we're going to see different kinds of worship. You're going to see all kinds of tribes and tongues and nations, all kinds of different people. You're going to see all kinds of different denominations. You're going going to see Southern Baptists there. You'll see Presbyterians there. If you look really hard, you may see a Methodist there. I don't know. It's a joke. You can laugh at that. See, we're frozen already. It's stuck in place. They got that poker face. It's just froze. The expression of worship is a particular thing, and there are many different external styles that are acceptable to God. But what we do oftentimes, I think, is we take whatever is normal for us and we say, well, this is right, and everything else is wrong. And there's problems with that because it's not necessarily true. And sometimes we can do that just blatantly and openly, but sometimes we do it much more subtly. You can see that sometimes in the songs that we sing. I mean, think about like contemporary worship songs versus traditional worship songs. Now, there would be someone in here who would say, there's nothing wrong with contemporary worship, it's just not my style. There's nothing wrong with traditional worship, it's just not my style. But the problem with that, you can hear it's not my style. And it's not something that I like or I enjoy. When the truth of the matter is, worship is not about us at all. Worship is all about Jesus. And we always have to be careful about imposing our wants and our desires on Jesus' prescriptions. And everything in the church, every single issue in the church has two extremes. You've got one extreme where we fail to extend grace where Jesus is given latitude. That's the extreme of legalism where we impose our rules and our regulations where Jesus didn't give any. That's one extreme in the church where we fail to extend grace where Jesus is given latitude. And then you have the other extreme in the church where we fail to stand firm where Jesus is plain. That's the opposite extreme. That's liberalism, where we let extra biblical ideas sort of creep into the church. And so we always have to guard against those two different extremes, and we have to try to see a balance in the middle. And the balance we seek is we want to be a people who live biblically accurate, spirit-filled lives. Okay, that's who we want to be. We want to be a people who live biblically accurate, spirit-filled lives. Now, worship, I want you to remember this. Worship is not something you do on Sunday mornings, or only on Sunday mornings. Worship is how you live your life. How you live your life all the time is an act of worship. And we want to be a people who seeks to live biblically accurate, spirit-filled lives. And that's your main idea this morning. And that's the idea that we're going to draw out here in Acts chapter 2. So if you've got your Bible with you, open them up. Acts chapter 2. We're continuing our study this morning. Acts chapter 2. We're going to look at the first 13 verses here. And there are a couple of doctrinal issues that threaten the church this morning that we're going to address just as we come to it. Acts chapter 2. Remember the main idea. We want to be a people who live biblically accurate, spirit-filled lives. I'm in Acts 2. Read along with me beginning in verse 1. It says, when the day of Pentecost arrived, they were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues of fire appeared to them and rested on each one of them. And they were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Now they were dwelling in Jerusalem, Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound, the multitude came together, and they were bewildered because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed and astonished, saying, are not all these who are speaking Galileans? Which means they thought they were uneducated, backwards farmers. Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each of us in our own native language? They're backwards, they're uneducated. How do they know our language? Verse 9, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God. And all were amazed and perplexed and said to one another, what does this mean? But others mocking said, they are filled with new May God bless the reading and the teaching and the preaching of His holy and infallible word. All right, now let me get you caught up on the timeline of where we're at here in Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, verse 1 happens exactly 50 days after the crucifixion. And I know that there because it says when the day of Pentecost had arrived. Now that's a term that we're all familiar with. We're all familiar with the term Pentecost, unfortunately for the wrong reasons. But the term Pentecost, it's a feast day that the Jews held. There was a feast called the Feast of Pentecost. On your own sometime, go over to Leviticus chapter 23. We got it a little bit this morning in our Sunday school class. That's the problem of having your pastor as the Sunday school teacher. We just randomly wander over to Leviticus. But on your own sometime, go to the book of Leviticus chapter 23. In that text, you have all the prescriptions for the feast that are prescribed for the Jewish nation to observe. And there are 7 of those feasts. And each of those feasts, they're all prophetic in nature. We have 2 different kinds of prophecy. We have what we call verbal predictive prophecy. That's where something is written down with very accurate verbalization of things to come. That's verbal predictive prophecy. And we also have a prophecy that's called typical prophecy. It's a picture of things to come. And so all of these Jewish feasts are typical prophecy events. They picture things that are coming. Take the Passover, for example. You all know the story of Passover. The Jews, they're in the land of Egypt. They're in bondage. They're being oppressed. And Pharaoh won't let his people go. And so God sends the 10 plagues on the nation. And the final one, of course, is the death angel. And the way that the Israelites were spared from the death angels, they had to sacrifice this lamb. And they had to put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Well, the Jewish feast of Passover commemorates that event, the passing over of the death angel, but it also points towards Jesus. Because Jesus is the Passover lamb. Jesus is the lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. So you see how it does both there. So that's the event that sort of starts the Jewish feast calendars, the event of Passover. And Jesus was crucified at the Passover feast as the Passover lamb. Now the day after that, you have another feast. It's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread. In the Bible, leaven is a picture of sin, and Jesus became sin. The one who knew no sin became sin, and Jesus is in the grave, kind of symbolically taking sin out of the world that way. You know what Jesus said about bread? He said, I am the bread of life. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. So you see how Jesus fulfills the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Well, the day after that, then you have what's called the Feast of First Fruits. So Friday is Passover, Saturday, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Sunday, the Feast of First Fruits. And guess what happened that day? Jesus was resurrected on that day. That's our Easter, the Feast of First Fruits. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20 tells us that Jesus is the first fruit from the dead. So Jesus is pictured there in that. So you have this feast calendar going on. And 50 days after the feast calendar gets started, 50 days after Passover, 50 days after the crucifixion, the Feast of Weeks, or the Feast of Pentecost, happens. And the Feast of Pentecost celebrates the wheat harvest. Not the harvest that was already gathered, but the harvest that is yet to come. They're celebrating the anticipation of the harvest that is to come. You say, well, what does that have to do with Jesus? Well, it's on the day of Pentecost that Jesus sends the Holy Spirit as the guarantee of our inheritance. The Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost comes as the down payment, so to speak, on our future. And then later on, you have the full harvest that's typified by the Feast of Trumpets. But here, you have the Feast of Pentecost. And as I was studying all these feasts this week, it's just rolling around in my brain. Man, God is amazing, is He not? God doesn't really operate in the gray area. It's not a lot of wiggle room. God is a God of detail. All of these feasts and all of these prophecies were planned out out and designed by Him really before the foundation of the world. But all these feasts were written down 1,500 years before they actually happened. And on the exact day, at the exact time, in the exact way that God deemed it so, or deemed it required, the prophecy of the feast is fulfilled. God is a God of detail. And that's why I say it's so important that we never go beyond what God says. It's a God of detail. It's so important that we never go beyond what God says, and it's so important that we never stop short of what God requires. We have to be a people who are biblically accurate in everything we do. So let me give you the setting for our text. This is the Feast of Pentecost. All the disciples, all that existed of the early church, they're all gathered together in the upper room. Jesus is ascended. Judas has been replaced. We saw that last week. And after those moments, the church goes back together. Disciples gather together in the upper room, and they have a prayer meeting. And that's where they all are. They're all gathered in the upper room. They're all having a prayer meeting. When all of a sudden, verse 2, it says, "And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting." Now don't get in your mind that like this is a windy day, like there's a gust of wind that blew through the upper room and knocked the papers on the floor. That's not what this is. It says it is a sound like a mighty rushing wind. And we all know what that sounds like, right? We've all seen the news. A tornado will blow through some backwoods place, and they'll go out, the news will go out and they'll find Buck-Tooth Bobby or whoever and put him on camera. "Yeah, I was out riding my tractor and a tornado come by and it sounded like a train." Whoop, whoop. Right? That's kind of what this is. There's no Buck-Tooth Bobby here. He's not one of the disciples. That's kind of what this is. A sound like a mighty rushing wind. But it's so much louder than like a tornado. You know what's louder than a tornado? A tornado siren. It's much louder than a tornado. It's produced by a mighty rushing wind. The tornado sirens heard all over the place. This noise wasn't kind of localized to the upper room. It was heard all over Jerusalem. It was so loud. I know that because a crowd gathers at the disciples' doorstep. They want to know what this is. So kind of picture this in your mind. You're all there in the upper room. You're all there in prayer. At your Baptist, it's a very quiet prayer meeting. You're all praying, and all of a sudden you have this loud, deafening tornado siren just going off in the middle of the room. And then you're like, "Oh, it's so loud." And you open your eyes and you look, and then there's like fire coming out of the tops of people's heads. It's crazy. 3 verse 3. And it says, "And divided tongues of fire appeared to them and rested on each one." Right? That's nuts. Fire rested on. What is this all about? Well, in the Old Testament, the most common depiction for God's presence was fire. Right? You can go all the way back to the book of Exodus and Moses and the burning bush, and God calls to Moses, and he goes, and there's a bush that's on fire, but it's not being consumed. Now, God wasn't hiding in the bush. Like, God's not like peeking through the bush branches. God's in fire. Fire is symbolic of God's presence. It's an awe-inspiring moment. It's this deafening noise and sound. They're in a prayer meeting, and all of a sudden, God is in their presence. I want to be in a prayer meeting like that. Y'all be here at 5 o'clock. We'll have this kind of prayer meeting tonight. 5 o'clock. Don't y'all want to be a part of it? Man, they're in God's presence. And they look at God's there. It's an awe-inspiring moment. And then verse 4 says that they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. Now we got to pause there for a minute. I said there was a couple of doctrinal issues that we needed to address, and they're both in this one verse. And I want you to remember this. Remember, something's not wrong because it's different. Something's wrong because it's biblically inaccurate. Okay? Something's not wrong because it's different. It's wrong because it's biblically inaccurate. There are churches who teach this text a little bit different, and all kinds of foolishness comes out of it. The foolishness has damning results. False doctrine has damning results. In our home church, there's a guy, his name was Reese. And the time Reese came to us, he was an old man. He was in his 80s. He got saved and baptized. He told me and Alicia that when him and his wife got married, they started attending this Pentecostal church, and they wanted to be saved. And what this church did was they locked them in a room and told them they couldn't come out of the room until they gave evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit by speaking in tongues. And they're locked in this room for hours. And then finally, when they got out of the room, Reese says that we never went back. 60 years they didn't attend church because of that. And he said his wife got into hell because of it. Sound doctrine gives life. False doctrine condemns. Okay? And something's not wrong because it's different. It's wrong because it's biblically inaccurate. So there's a couple of issues here that we're going to make plain this morning. The first one is the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The baptism of the Holy Spirit.